Problem 11. What is the degree measure of the acute angle formed by the lines with slopes 2 and 1 over 3? To do this, draw yourself a rough sketch. Let's suppose that this is our coordinate axis system, and we have two lines of slopes 2 and 1 over 3. If we have a slope that's larger and larger, it would be much more flat, so therefore we will have a line that looks like this. That would be the slope of 2, so k is equal to 2. And we will have another one that looks like this, because when your slope gets smaller and smaller, it gets steeper and steeper, so that's k is 1 over 3. We are basically trying to find this angle. How do you do that? Well, when I think of angles, we want to think of formulas that we already know that will give us an angle. The first thing that came to my mind was vectors, because let's say that vector w dotted vector v. By definition, that's equal to the magnitude of w times the magnitude of v times the cosine of theta, where theta is the angle between the vectors. And it just so happens that vectors are very much like lines in the sense that they also, point outwards and have a linear direction, and then we can find the angle between them. So on the test, this is what I used. I used a dot product between two vectors because in the formula there's a cosine theta that I can take advantage of. But how do we find the vectors w and v? To find the vector, you must find a starting and initial and ending point. The initial point can be shared with 0, 0, right? But what about the ending point? Well, this line formula is y is equal to 2x. Y is equal to 1 over 3x. So 1 over 3x, and this is y is equal to 2x. So therefore, we can say that there's a point here that's 1, 2, and we can say here that there's a point, let's say right here, where it's not drawn to scale, but it's 3, 1, right? So with this, how do we find the vectors? Well, let's call this vector w, let's call this vector v. Vector w, given this scenario, will be equal to 3, 1. And we know that vector v will be equal to 1, 2. With this, what is w dot v? Well, w dot v is the same thing as 3 plus, or the magnitude of w times the magnitude of v times cosine theta. So the magnitude of w is simply the square of 3 plus the square of 1 taking the square root. So that's square root of 10. And this is going to be the same thing, where magnitude of v is equal to 1 squared plus 2 squared square rooted, which is the same thing as root 5. So this is root 10 times root 5 times cosine of theta. But what is this quantity? This quantity can be solved for by just simply multiplying 3 and 1 added with 1 and 2. So that's 3 times 1 plus 1 times 2, which is the same thing as 5. So 5 is the same thing as root 50 times cosine theta. So cosine of theta must be equal to 5 over root 50. Now, what is 5 over root 50? That looks very ugly, so let's try to simplify this. Root 50 is the same thing as root 25 times 2. Therefore, that's 5 root 2. Therefore, this is the same thing as 5 over 5 root 2. This looks very good. Because why? If we simplify this even further, that's 1 over root 2. If we put the root 2 in the numerator, we get root 2 over 2. What angle of cosine theta gives root 2 over 2? Well, that's obviously 45 degrees. So therefore, if we scroll up, we find our answer to be answer choice C.